Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Moms on a Mission podcast. Thank you so much for joining me today. I think you are really going to love our guest today. We welcome to the show Kyle Seraphin. I don't know if you remember, but in the news about a year ago, we heard of being the FBI being targeted or be targeting Catholics and various Christians, and of course, it was denied at the very top. And Kyle Seraphin called him out. He was one of two, and we're going to have him join us today to talk about that. Whistleblowers are interesting folks. I mean, they're a brave person, someone who is willing to take a risk. And Kyle Seraphin is that very person. And he is a Catholic himself. In fact, there are a lot of Catholics in the FBI, and I can't wait to talk to him about that today. So don't go anywhere. This will be really encouraging for you to take a stand for truth. Kyle Seraphin, welcome to the Moms on a Mission podcast. I have so been looking forward to talking with you today. Thanks for joining
I'm excited about it. I think it's going to get weird.
Yes, the weirder the better. So before we get going, you have on your X page that you are a recovering FBI agent. And of course, I want to delve into that. But before we do, you had a photo on there the other day that absolutely cracked me up. I showed my husband, and only a recovering FBI agent is going to have a bathroom counter that looks like this. But you're like, wife, hey, what's that gun doing in the bathroom? I don't know. I guess I was just ready, huh? And she says, ready for what? Me, I don't remember. Okay, that checks. And then you said, I married the best one. That picture is so hilarious because only a recovering FBI agent would have something like that in his bathroom.
Yeah, I didn't tell her I posted that. We kind of just keep the X account. She doesn't have an X account. She doesn't really care. So whatever happens on social media is not real. My wife is really special because she's from Brooklyn. And so she's a recovering kind of lib, if you will. And she probably was always really conservative in her values or mindset. She just didn't know it. And she self-illuminated and sort of self-radicalized over our dating. And when we got married, by the time that was the case, by the time she's been a mom, she's got 4 kids. We have 4 little babies running around. She's just a kind of a real special creature. But I remember one interaction she had because she's a counselor by trade. She has a master's degree. And so she spent a lot of time in the very compassionate field of counseling. It's very left-leaning and kind of bleeding heartish. And one of her counselor friends said, did you know that Kyle owned all those guns when you married him? And her response is perfect. She said, yeah, I did. That's why I married him, so he could protect our babies. And their head was like, just kind of exploded. And they went, oh. And she was like, I wanted to marry an aggressive, masculine guy. And I'm not the biggest guy in the world. I'm just hyper aggressive. But I have a very strong protective instinct. And that always resonated because my wife is like under 5 feet tall. So, you want someone that's going to make sure that you can protect the baby. She's not going to do it. She's little. And so that's kind of our little dynamic. And the idea that I'd have a rifle randomly out there on the countertop next to a bunch of hair ties and some lotion and stuff. And people got really in the weeds. They were like, why do you have 2 bottles of lotion? I'm like, that's not my department. I don't buy that. So I wouldn't know, but I don't question my wife's potions. If she spends money on potions, that's what she does. No big deal.
That's right. And she looks amazing. So, well, and of course I noted the Father's Day card on the counter, and I thought that was it was just so great. It's like, it's real world right there. And I think that we need to, not that we need to have guns lying around the house, but like we were talking about before the show, I just think if we have guns in the home, we should go to a range regularly. We should know what we're doing. And that way we can defend ourselves. And quite frankly, it's a lot of fun when you become good at it. And, it can be kind of a hobby as well, but a productive one at that, so you can be safe and protect your family. So I just thought the picture was hilarious and so perfect for you, a former recovering FBI agent. I did want to ask you, your story is so, I could interview you for 5 hours. I mean, I've followed you for a while. I know you've done a million things, owned a bar in Kansas. I mean, you name it, you've done it. And I just think it's outstanding. Jack of all trades, definitely. But what led you, Kyle, to become interested in the FBI? I know you were like 27, you were older when you got into the FBI, but like what caused you to become interested in that?
So you're close. I actually joined the military at 27.
Oh, 27, right. Okay.
It's taken a lot of, I didn't really question why. I just sort of did things, but I've spent a lot of time reflecting in the last couple of years because 1, people ask, and 2, you got to figure out why you're where you are. God has a very strange plan for me, and it was never obvious to me at the time. But I went to Jesuit high schools. I grew up as a Catholic. I grew up in Catholic schools and a mixture of public schools. I eventually ended up in this Catholic high school in Dallas called Jesuit College Preparatory School of Dallas, which is a very old school. It's been there for a long time, since the 40s. And they have this motto, like all Jesuit schools, I believe, that just says that we're supposed to be men for others. And if they're co-ed, they're men and women for others. And so I started thinking about that at about the age of 25, 26. It's like, what am I living for and why? What is my purpose on this earth? Like, I'm a physically active, capable, guy, but I have all these different sort of gifts. I can work in finance, and I've worked in a bar, and I've run restaurants, and I've done business. But what's the purpose? Who am I serving? And so in order to be a man for others, it requires you kind of taking a service mindset. What I came to is that I better get some better skills, because I don't have any outdoor wilderness skills and shooting skills and all the other things, like a Napoleon Dynamite kind of moment. I need some nunchuck skills. And so I joined the military to do that. And when I got out, the natural progression is that there was possibly a place in federal law enforcement or in the intelligence community. So I actually applied to the CIA, and they ignored me. And I applied to the State Department, and they also ignored me, I think, or maybe I stopped. But the FBI reached out to me in 2015, and by 2016, I was at Quantico. So it was it wasn't like a plan, but I do know that I wanted to serve, and I wanted to be in a protective role, and I wanted to put myself between the people that want to do evil, because there really are a lot of people out there that have some really bad intentions, and the people that just want to live their lives and not worry about it, and don't want to own a bunch of guns with thermal scopes looking out their front window, because that's not for everybody. And you shouldn't have to be that in America. That's the brilliance of our country, is you don't have to be necessarily on guard and protective all the time, because there are people who will sign up and do that.
Well, don't you think it's weird? I mean, I guess it's not weird, but it's sad that after all these years from 1776 to now, I mean, that is one of the reasons why our country was founded, for religious liberty, but also, our Second Amendment, right to bear arms. I mean, like, wow, it's so amazing to me after all these years. It would be great to look back and see that we've gotten better, and that tyranny. I feel like tyranny will always be there. You've got man, a sinful nature. There'll always be tyranny we have to fight, but I guess you would think after all these years that we become better. We'd have less tyranny as time goes on.
I think that the devil works in very interesting ways. And one of the ways that all of this plays out is that over the last probably 50 to maybe 75 years, people have actually voted against their own self-interest and their own liberty. And that would have probably blown the minds of those that were self-reliant and founded this country and moved across the plains and took their wife and their kids and cocked the wagons and floated Oregon Trail style across all the things because they didn't want to wait for the Ford or whatever. I was a video game kid in the 80s watching that. But how many people have voted against their own liberties? The big difference between people on the left and the right in a lot of ways is like, if you're somebody who's conservative and you don't want to eat meat, then you just become a vegetarian and you just don't eat meat. But if you're on the left, you think that we should mandate the stoppage of meat production, and we should stop butchers, and we should outlaw the thing that we don't like. And they do the same thing about guns, and they do the same thing about other things that basically are your own business. I feel like the one characteristic of people on the political left is that they want to mandate their position and their opinion for everyone else to live on. Like, I don't tell everybody what the best way to live is. I know that the way that I live is better than a lot of people because I've seen what the results are. And if you want to take the example and live that way, then great. And if not, best of luck to you. I'm not going to tell you that you shouldn't be able to do what you did. But when you get in a jam and you look around and you go, why is my life not working out? It's like you probably had babies before you got married, and you probably, didn't, preserve the resources you had. You probably didn't look after things and have a spiritual value center. So there's a lot of reasons why people are unhappy, and it looks predictable from the outside, but I don't want to mandate that on anybody. But it's available to you if you want to go do it. And that's what should be happening in this country.
That's a very eloquent and very succinct way to describe the difference between the left and the right. And it just makes sense what you're saying. And you can see that pattern, manifested in lots of different arenas. I wanted to transition to, so you joined the FBI. Did you notice any nefarious activity, or did you have any red flags instantly when you got there? Or was it a matter of time? I want to transition to this memo. You are a whistleblower, and you did expose the targeted surveillance of American Catholics. And I just was curious if you had any red flags initially, or if it was just something that you noted in time.
So day one, I walked in and I wore my most smokable suit. It was my most athletic fit with the most stretch fabric, because I thought I was going to get smoked and dropped on my face, because I came from a military place where when you showed up at the new unit, you paid for it in sweat, right? And so I got there on this Sunday in June of 2016, and it's Sunday afternoon, and I reported in, and I go up to this desk, and it's like a classic government table. There's a lady behind it, and she's got all these folders, and I check in. I say, hey, I'm Kyle Seraphin. I'm here to check in. And she says, oh, well, welcome to the FBI. And she's just like a fat lady in her 50s. And I was like, this can't be it. I'm like looking around, like where I'm going to get hit in the face from the backside. Like I'm just waiting for whatever the next shoe is, because it looks like a setup to me. And she's like, yeah, lunch is in the cafeteria. You can wander around. You can take a tour. Like, we'll all meet back here like in a couple hours. And I'm like, this is not right. Like something is not right. But that was what it was for the first week or so. It was a bunch of people that were soft and gentle, and it was not violent, aggressive, or preparing me for some sort of danger. It was like people having government onboarding experience, and this is what your benefits look like. And I just kind of waited. And it just never really got much harder than that. There were some times where we did a couple of push-ups, and I heard a lot of people kind of crying when we had to put our knuckles down on the asphalt. It's like, man, I've held the push-up position for 8 hours in gravel. I don't even know what these people are crying about, but it was just a thing. So it was always kind of suspect. The one thing that I remember at the FBI Academy that was really unusual, because I've been in a lot of different jobs. I've worked for county government. I've worked as a paramedic in a private ambulance company. I worked for a large high-volume hospital. I've worked in restaurants, a lot of restaurants. I sold computers. I worked for Dell. I worked at a radio station. I worked at a movie studio doing finance. I saw a lot of different things. I've never worked in a job where someone said, this is the best job in the world, over and over again, like an indoctrination. And so I'm a pretty inquisitive type of guy. I'm probably a natural investigator if you get right down to it. So my question was this: what other jobs have you had? And the answer was almost always like, I've worked in the FBI and I was in the military, or I've only worked in the FBI. They didn't have any experience. I had more job experiences. Like the number of jobs that I had held seemed to surpass like any half dozen of my classmates or more.
Yeah,
And
combined.
so yeah, you start having these people that have been in there for 20 years, and they go, this is the best job in the world. And it's like, what do you like? The best job I had in the world ever was working for Warner Brothers. I worked on a movie lot. I was surrounded by beautiful ladies. I had like more money than I needed to spend. I worked walking distance from work. I rode a motorcycle. It was awesome.
That's cool.
I was unmarried, so it was a different kind of life, but that was the best job I ever had, because it was really like the expectations were all within my reach, and it was a cool place to work, and the culture was good. So for people to say that at the FBI, I always was immediately sort of suspicious of them. And then I got out into the field, and it just wasn't the best place. There were days that were really good. There were days that were like any other job that were frustrating. And then there were jobs that were like really bad, where you'd go and somebody would tell you to do something, and you're like, I don't think we're supposed to be able to do that. And so I got into immediate conflict with my supervisors in 2016, 2017, early 2018, where I was working a program called counterintelligence. And as far as I can tell, counterintelligence basically is a violation of the US Constitution, at least the way they work it is, because they go after and investigate American citizens with no allegation of criminal activity, and they do so for the purposes of information. And that's not what I signed up to do. And when I brought that up, that's technically being a whistleblower. So my first actions in the FBI were whistleblower actions. And I immediately kind of highlighted myself. I said, what are we going to do with this information? And they said, well, we're going to know more things. I said, well, that's not what we're doing. That's just what happens. What are we going to do? And mostly what they wanted is to have these cases open to be able to continue and do file reviews. So I first learned about what we call the self-licking ice cream cone. The job exists because there are tasks for the job to do, and then you have a job because there are tasks for you to do, and it just goes around and around. It just serves itself. And so one of the hopes that I have for this new FBI director, Kash Patel, who I hope gets sworn in and is confirmed, one of the major things I want to see is the elimination of self-serving programs and a kind of a focus on the mission of what people think the FBI actually is. Yeah. Because Americans have this expectation, but their expectation is unrealized as it currently sits.
Yeah, I definitely want to talk to you about your thoughts on Kash. So, but I would love for you to talk about this memo and exposing that and the decision. I'm sure it wasn't just like a really quick decision, but what went through your mind? And then talk to us about the steps in which you exposed this.
So it goes back to that initial kind of saying, hey, this is not what we're supposed to be doing. That happened very early on. I kind of developed like sort of an increasing level of frustration and an increasing attempt to get this to go to the right attention. So I actually brought another thing to the attention of my supervisors in 2019. I had an attorney draft up a letter to the Office of General Counsel saying, we are doing something that is objectively bad for us. It's going to discredit our ability to testify. And you are abusing, like, this is just based on payroll records. So I saw administrative and also procedural things that were wrong. So I'm calling these things out. No one's doing anything about it. I kept escalating. I went to the Office of General Counsel. I went to the Office of the Inspector General. I went to the Equal Opportunity Employment Commission, increasing. It all gets ahead during the COVID mandates, which happened in 2021. And so it's October of 2021, or maybe it was late September. They basically said that we had to get these COVID shots, and I filled out a religious objection saying, I'm not going to do it. Your move. And at about the same time, about 3 weeks later, I get an email saying that the FBI is going to be investigating parents at school board meetings and using counterterrorism tools, which was the really key part, because the Attorney General had already said that they weren't going to use those tools. So I thought he might have perjured himself. I had a good faith belief in that. I brought it to my member of Congress. And from then on out, basically November 23rd, 2021, I'm kicked out of the office. I'm also refusing to do COVID tests every 72 hours, which seemed really dumb, because I just wasn't going to do it. I thought it was only to highlight the Christians, and I'm pretty sure it was. And a federal judge is sort of sussing that out right now. So that was step one. I get back into the office because they changed the rules. Go figure. We all saw them move in the goalposts. And my career was essentially over on November 23rd of 2021. So I get kicked out of the office. And then other people were like, well, you've already lost your job. So like, we could bring you some stuff. And that's what happened. I got kicked out. I ended up going on Dan Bongino's podcast. I became, a whistleblower before that, but people knew my name because I went on a podcast, which is in violation of FBI policy, but they stopped paying me in June. And then in September, a couple months later, my wife and I sold our house. We got into a car. She went to go live with my parents, and I flew to Miami to go do a talk with Dan Bongino, and I didn't even have a home. And I came back, got in my truck, and drove to my folks' house, which was 12 hours away. And so from then on, it's been a wild journey, and people have brought me things, evidence of malfeasance, and including this sort of memo talking about what was going on. Truly speaking, it's not a memo. It was an intelligence product. And that means that there was an analyst, and it turns out that analyst actually went to a Catholic university, which is sort of compelling, and also a Jesuit school, which is very interesting. And this analyst wrote up essentially a argument that people who engage in the Latin Mass and that prefer the traditional Latin Mass, which is known as TLM, those Catholics were most likely or most susceptible to being recruited into a white supremacy movement. And the reasons is because of those particular Catholics have certain feelings about abortion, which is shared by basically all Christians. They have certain feelings about an open border and the fact that they want it secured, that they have certain feelings about whether or not you should be teaching kids about transgender ideology and critical race theory, which is to say, these are like basically mainstream conservative ideas. And the person that brought it to me, by the way, was investigated by the FBI and removed from his job after 27 years of zero negative information service. He never did anything wrong, no write-ups ever. In fact, was in a senior leadership position and was removed. Had all of his stuff thrown out on his lawn unceremoniously, and they let him retire basically the same day. But they frog marched him out of the office. That guy brought it to me and said, I'm not a Catholic, but if they can go after and adjudicate what a radical Catholic is, they can find a radical Baptist, they can find a radical Lutheran, they can find a radical Episcopal, whatever that would look like. They can go find evangelicals. If they can adjudicate what equals radical under the religious terms, they are violating the First Amendment. This cannot stand. It has to go to Congress. And it spawned an investigation that showed that it wasn't just one field office, it was at least three, and that they were doing that. They were trying to introduce sources into churches under this witch hunt for this fake commodity that the FBI really wants, which is called white supremacy. And so there's a much bigger demand for it than there is, in fact, a supply in America, which anybody who lives in America knows. So they went out and had to find it. And when you have to go find things like that, you are now searching for cases, which was my original allegation. We are looking for problems by finding the people to focus on instead of getting the problems reported to us and investigating what federal crime took place. And that's the fundamental difference between what the FBI ought to be and what the FBI currently is, and why I hope it reforms.
I mean, this sounds like the stinking KGB.
Very much.
I mean, it's so alarming to me. So after this time has passed now, where are you with exposing all this? Where I know who's in charge, obviously. So we're looking for this to change, but that would be like them reporting and turning themselves in. So I'm assuming that after you blew the top off all of this, that nothing really has happened.
So they removed the memo, or they removed the intel product, but they didn't get rid of the person. And as far as I know, that person wasn't even chastised or straightened out. So that's kind of interesting. The leadership obviously didn't change. What we have seen from groups like Catholic Vote, which is an organization I worked with, and they did a bunch of FOIAs, they basically just saw a cover up. The FBI was like, where's our exposure and how do we tighten this thing down? Like, it's a PR problem and not an institutional rot problem where they're doing something that is the opposite of what the American people should expect from a non-partisan, law enforcement agency. So they haven't fixed it. The culture still exists. Chris Wray said he's going to step down, so I guess that's good. But at the end of the day, there's this like big gaping hole in FBI management culture that allowed it. And a lot of this comes down to something that's very, very unsexy and it's very uninteresting to most people, unless you're just a policy wonk. But the FBI is currently not functioning on a political basis. And that would be my argument. They're actually functioning out of self-interest. The self-interest is called IPM, or Integrated Program Management. And this is a concept that was created by McKinsey Consulting, which is a big consulting firm used to employ a lot of famous people, including like Pete Buttigieg. But they basically go into government agencies and try to figure out how to run them like businesses. And the thing they wanted to do was measure FBI senior executive performance. And so the way you do that is you attach metrics and numbers to everything. So imagine that you're trying to meet a quota, right? You want to do how many speeding tickets should we issue and how much revenue can we get in? The FBI does something similar to that, but they do it for like terrorism cases and how many disruptions and dismantlements and how many mitigations and how many source introductions and sophisticated techniques are being used. And so by doing all of that, they've basically given themselves an opportunity at the beginning of every year to forecast how many of these cases they're going to find. And then they go find those cases, and then they reward themselves, pat themselves on the back, and then they get a bonus. And so this has been self-serving, not because of politics, I don't think. I think it's been self-serving because of money, like the oldest type of corruption. And then also, they don't want to expose that what they're doing is not serving people in America. They want to just kind of carry on, if you will. It's totally suboptimal for what we're trying to accomplish, I would say.
So obviously we are so all incredibly excited about Kash Patel and President-elect Trump nominating him as FBI director. I've read Government Gangsters. I don't know if you've read Kash Patel's book. I'm sure you have, Government Gangsters. But I mean, the information that he has, he's his own whistleblower, right? Like he explained Russiagate. It was a fascinating read, but I find it very interesting with Christopher Wray stepping down, cutting short his term. And I'm so curious what your thoughts are. I've heard Kash Patel say, the very first day in office, he would like to turn the FBI headquarters into a deep state museum. I'm wondering, what do you think he's going to do the first day? That's my first question. My second is, Christopher Wray, he can run, but he can't hide, right? Like, I mean, Kash can still investigate him, right?
Probably won't see a whole lot. Chris Wray is kind of an interesting character. So people have to understand what the FBI is. But to answer your first question about, what does he got to do first day? The first day you have to go in, and it's just like touching a subject when you're making an arrest. The first touch that you make when you are bringing somebody into custody is how the rest of the interaction is going to go. And if you touch them firmly and aggressively, but also judiciously and fairly, then you will get positive outcomes. And if you choose to go lighthearted and real limp, then you're going to have a real problem because that person will see weakness. So he's going to have to go in and do something that is going to be a little bit difficult. It's a balancing act between a firm and aggressive grip that is also fair. And there are people that need to pay for what has happened, and they are mostly in the management. There are people that did the wrong thing, but they should be given more chances to be able to correct the behavior because they're kind of in an untenable spot where they're being asked to do something. And it's kind of a gray area whether or not it was legal, appropriate, right, because that was the job. So he's got this very difficult thing to balance in front of him. Luckily, Kash is very, very bright. I think he's the most qualified person to walk into that job probably ever. He's more qualified than Hoover, who just started the agency. He's more qualified than the big names that we've seen recently. So you got Louis Freeh, you got Robert Mueller, you got Jim Comey. All these people, and Chris Wray, they're all sort of like former DOJ guys. They got a prosecutor background. They spent their time working as lawyers in fancy firms and whatnot, but they don't have the background. And in a fair world, the left would be thrilled about Kash Patel stepping in. He's a brown man who used to work and got his start as a public defender. Like, how we have people on the left that are mad about this, but they are. He's also got senior level experience at DOJ, at DOD. He's seen the intel. He's seen the kinetic end of what the counterterrorism mission looks like. So I'm very excited about who he is as a human being. He's also a really nice, regular guy, and he would sit and talk to you. He'd talk to you in a t-shirt. He doesn't need a suit on to be able to be somebody.
He's so kind. I mean, he's just a kind human being, and his father raised him really, really well.
100%. So the first conversation that I had with him was in November of 2022. I'd just gone on Dan Bongino's podcast. We got 1 million views. And so people started hearing my name, but I was kind of hot politically because I'm not the most Republican. I'm very conservative, but I'm not Republican, and I don't play by rules of partisanship. And so there were members of Congress that wouldn't reach out and talk to me, even though I'd shared information that they were campaigning on. And that continues to this day, obviously. The fun thing is I get a phone call and it's Kash Patel. And he says, hey, this cat, I didn't know who he was. I knew of his name and I knew that he was in Trump's orbit. That was about it. And
Yeah.
I said, what can I do for you? And he said, he said, I don't want to do something for you. He said, you just lost your job. I don't want your kids to go without.
Oh
Can
my
I
God.
write you a check?
Kyle, are you serious?
Yeah. So listen to this though. He has the foundation. It's called Fight with Cash. So, and you haven't heard this story before. You don't know
No.
this, but he reaches out and I said, well, what do you need? And he goes, I don't need anything. And I said, can I, do you want to do a podcast? You want to get loud? He goes, yeah. All those things for sure. But that's not what I'm talking about. I'm saying, I want to support your family. I want to send you a check. I have money that people give to help people like you. I want to send you a check for $10,000. Can you tell me an address and will you agree to accept it? And I went, there are people that need it way more than me. He goes, that's probably true, but I don't know them. I know of you. I was recommended to help you out, and I'm going to do that if you're willing to let me. And I said, well, I got friends that got problems too. And he goes, I'm going to write them checks too. I said, what do you need from us? He said, nothing. In fact, I don't even necessarily want you to tell anybody, not because you shouldn't tell anybody, but because I don't need the notoriety and neither do you. I just want to make sure that your families have presents at Christmas, that they are making sure that your kids don't know that they're going to be hungry. And no one's ever really heard that. There's been a couple of radio programs in the last couple of weeks I've been talking about this, but this is something that I've known for 2+ years, that he's a good man. He's a good person, and he's never gone out there and asked for notoriety. He just helped coordinate a donation of $50,000 to fallen officers, which I'm just going to announce here. We haven't told anybody about it, but they're writing the check out of the foundation on the behalf of the FBI suspendables, the guys like me and my buddies, because he said, who can we donate this to support fallen law enforcement officers? And I said, who? And I got out to the foundation. I used to work with one of the cops, like when I was actually in the FBI. And he called me up directly and he said, it's been a really rough year fundraising in this economy. And this is a really big deal to us. And I said, awesome. And I said, I think you should go to the Christmas party for the foundation and I'm going to give you my spot. So I'm not in DC. So go ahead. And that's the kind of person he is. You're not going to hear that anywhere else. That's going to be, I don't announce it on my Twitter account because it's just not my business.
Yeah.
But as far as human beings go, like a decent human being that's not in it to fly around in a $60 million jet and doesn't need a protective detail to feel like a big shot, Cass is a big shot wherever he goes.
Yeah.
And this is another little fun thing. The first moment that I met him face to face was in December of that same year, 2022. I went to a Turning Point event. I spoke on stage with James O'Keefe, who I don't have a lot of love for, but things happened, whatever. I go to this event and I saw Cash briefly. He shook my hand. We were just passing two ships in the night kind of deal. I was about to go on stage and then I lost track of him. And as I was taking my wife, who was pregnant at the time, by the way, we had no home. I'm taking her to the hotel room and I check her in because she's exhausted. And I had these people that were riding the elevator with us say, it was so nice. We just saw Cash Patel and shook his hand and he's down at the bar. And my wife is like, you got to go thank him for the check personally. And I said, I will. Okay, good. So I go downstairs and I go check in with him. He gives me a big hug. He buys me a Coors Light because that's what he's drinking, which I think is just funny because I just don't really drink Coors Light.
Right.
It's not my beer. I'm probably a fancier beer guy than he is. And who is he hanging out with? He's not hanging out with celebrities. He's hanging out with the guys that were protecting Jason Aldean, who happened to be former Green Berets, like my kind of people, special operations dudes that have been at the tip of the spear. I ended up actually meeting the chief security guy there, who was friends with my last partner in the FBI, who's also a Green Beret. They went through the Q course together, which is the selection for special forces. And that's who he's hanging out with. He's hanging out with the security detail, not the big shots, because that's the kind of man he is. He's a regular guy who will wear, a t-shirt and go talk to Sean Ryan. And he fits equally well there as briefing someone like Donald Trump. That's really special to have that sort of, it reminds me of the Kipling poem. And I can't think of what it's called right now, but it's about the touch that you want your son to be, like a man who can walk with kings, but to talk to the regular people and maintain the common touch. Cash has that in spades. It's really a special thing. And I think it's special for the FBI right now.
Yeah, he is a special human being. And I mean, I think when I met him, what struck me was his just obviously his brilliance, but his humility and his kindness. And those are attributes you don't see a lot in Washington. You see more arrogance, selfishness, and pride. And that is the antithesis of who he is. But I've heard you talk about, you talked about this sense of justice that you have in your heart. And he strikes me as that same type of human being, just a sense of justice and wanting to do what's right. No matter if there's an R after the person's name or a D, justice, should be blind, right? Liberty, it should be blind. And so I really enjoyed meeting him and getting to know him. And he's a really great guy. And that is a huge step for liberty and justice for the United States with his appointment. I believe that, he will get in there and just do a wonderful job. And I think about the FBI. I mean, it's been around since 1908, and I'm like, can't we just abolish this thing? I mean, it seems so corrupt. And I believe if anybody can clean it up, it's Cash. But I just wonder, do we even need this? Because Cash has talked about just sending all these federal agents out in the field and doing what they're supposed to do. And that is actually working, not drinking coffee all day, maybe getting physically fit, and then, investigating crimes. And really, I mean, wasn't the FBI developed was to really connect the different states on a federal level so that there was communication among the states. I mean, obviously, if we abolish the FBI and dismantle that, the states would still be, having their police and their fighting against crime and all of that. But the FBI on paper, theoretically, it looks pretty good from a communication standpoint, but man, it's lost its way.
Well, think about this. The FBI was created, you said 1908, that was the Bureau of Investigation. It became the FBI in 1935. So they even lie about their birth date. It's like a woman who lies about her age or her weight. You're kind of like, what other things are you lying about here? So you married? So you start thinking about the way that it actually operated. And the FBI has violated civil liberties in every generation, starting from the beginning before it even became the FBI itself, like 1917, 1919, Palmer raids, going after communists. Am I a big fan of communists? No. But I also think you have a right to be a communist in America because I understand what the First Amendment says. And you're allowed to speak and organize and appeal and do all the things that are supposed to happen, assemble and try to petition for the redress of grievances. Like you name it, it exists for you, whether you have bad ideas or not, or ideas that Kyle Seraphin thinks are bad. So can we demolish the thing? No, I don't think we can. There's not political will. Would I be okay with it? For sure. 100%. I'd lock the doors. I'd be the last guy out the door and I'd be happy to turn it off. If they would let me, I'll put the padlock on. But that's not going to happen because Congress doesn't will it. And so nobody wants to lose a tool that may exist for the executive. And it's a decent, okay tool. But back in those days, the reason that the FBI took off and what it started doing was interstate crime and theoretically federal crimes were the thing that filled that water between the states and the counties. So jurisdictional problems, the ability to communicate when somebody could do a bank robbery, let's say in Arkansas, and then they could run down to Louisiana and then they could run over to Texas and they run up to Oklahoma and then they're gone. The FBI filled that gap in theory, and whether they did a great job is another argument, but that's what they came to do. We don't need that anymore. We have things called mutual aid. We have comms. We have a NIM system, the National Incident Management System. They've got all kinds of different abilities to transmit warrants so that warrants don't just disappear and you don't just lose track of people at the county line, extradition agreements, and so on. So we have all those problems solved. So the American people have to decide, what do we get for $11 billion that we spend on today's FBI? And the answer needs to be federal complex law enforcement, massive white collar fraud and scandals. We need to be able to handle the things that are terrorism, that have extrajudicial boundaries. We need to be able to handle the big things. And then the FBI should actually be in a servant role. Think about this. A Christian servant role. It doesn't have to be Christian in name, but indeed that's what it's going to be. Those are Western values. Serving local and state law enforcement, because that's where the American people are going to feel the impact. And there are some plans that I've been privy to, and I don't want to say too much more about them, but violence and violent crime mitigation tactics are things the FBI could really do. Bring to bear a national and highly funded laboratory division, some of the capabilities of technology, things like what's called CAST, which is cellular exploit abilities. They could bring on things like planes and surveillance and other sort of like really high-powered resources that could augment what the state and the locals do. And that would be the way that you would bridge the gap between the cops that you're living next door to and these sort of faceless, nameless FBI agents, who, by the way, are going to have to go back to wearing a suit if they want to go back and earn the respect. They're going to have to start acting like people that deserve respect. Kind of like when your kids are not behaved and you put them in a uniform for a little while. It's like, well, now you got to wear the uniform because you're going to have to prove to me that you can earn the right to have discretion. I think the FBI needs to be on kind of its own probation for a little bit. And that will be a good thing. And I think Cash is the guy to bring that as well.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. I mean, just so scary when you think about the weaponization, the two-tier system of justice. I mean, it's scary. You think about what they've done, how they've come after you, how they come after General Flynn, President Trump. I mean, it's amazing that President Trump is still standing, let alone that he's president. I mean, that he didn't die either of those two times. And just the lawfare is unreal. And you can see why people don't become whistleblowers. They don't stand up because they're freaking afraid, and they probably should be. I mean, rightfully so, when you think about the power and the money behind the US government, how they can come after someone and destroy them in the blink of an eye. I mean, that is true. They sure can. And so that's why I'm so grateful for you, Kyle. It's like you probably didn't think too much about it, and that heart for justice probably led the way in your decision to become a whistleblower. And so from me, Moms on a Mission here in Tulsa, Oklahoma, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for sharing the truth. How can folks find you and follow you? You have the Kyle Seraphin show. You have your X account, which I love how much you post and all the things on there. How can they follow you and connect with you?
So the easiest way is probably on X or on True Social. I'm a little bit less on True Social, but it's always at Kyle Seraphin. So I use the same handle. I'm not on Instagram because I'm just not good at it. Then also they can follow me on the Rumble channel, which is rumble.com/Kyle Seraphin. So again, the same thing on the name. And if they want to go see the locals, which also does have the podcast on there, it's kyleseraphin.com. So you can see not particularly creative, but easy to follow in all places. Just my name, Kyle Seraphin with a PH. And I answer all people of all sizes and all accounts, and nobody is short of getting scrutiny or scorn or praise. So I'm a regular guy. I'm the same way I am in real life.
You are. And that's how I get a hold of you. I just messaged you on X. And so thank you so much. Thank you for what you're doing. And thank you for joining me today, Kyle Seraphin.
My pleasure.
And thank you all so much for listening. I hope you're encouraged by what Kyle shared today and really motivated to stand for truth. I mean, really, this is all about protecting our family as moms, as dads. As Christians, we need to protect the very foundation and roots of what our country was founded on. That was Judeo-Christian values, freedom of speech, right to bear arms, all of these things. And so Kyle really inspires me to just stand for truth, no matter what the cost, and really doing what you can to protect your family. And I was speaking with him before the show, like, I want to go to a gun range and just, we have guns, but we need to know how to use them and shoot them regularly and become familiar with it as a way to protect your family. Another way that you can protect your legacy and your family is to start purchasing gold and silver. I know you've heard me talk about this before, and we don't hear people talk about it. And to become educated, you have to listen to podcasts like mine or Andy Scheckman, his Little by Little podcast, all these different places to learn about the importance of starting to diversify and purchasing gold and silver. Why do we listen to the government and think that, just investing in the stock market exclusively, like that's always going to have value? The reason why the green dollar bill, that paper dollar bill, has value is because the government says it. It used to be gold backed. It used to be like a dry cleaner's receipt. You'd go to the dry cleaners, you give them an expensive garment or just any garment, shirt, and they give you a piece of paper. Well, now when we came off the gold standard, now they're just saying that that dry cleaner receipt, it magically has value. Well, it only has value because the government said it. So if we don't believe the government about the injections, about the origin, of 2020, how all that was, thrown on us, if we don't believe the government at 99% of the time, why would we believe them about money? And so I'm just saying, just start learning about it. Start getting a little bit of gold and silver. You can just purchase silver for around $30 an ounce, and you can just start doing a little bit. Do that, and then allow God to do what you can't do, and that is multiply. God is a God of multiplication, and He can multiply. So order some gold and silver today. Give me a call or email me. You can call me at the numbers below. My picture there, the 1-833-217-3333. Call me. And I'm an outside broker now for Miles Franklin. I can beat almost anybody's price in the nation. Give me a chance, and let's see what we can do. And at the very minimum, let's have a conversation and get you educated so you can start protecting your family's financial legacy today. Thanks so much for listening. God bless, and we'll see you next time.